just think in terms of the form also, like in a panel or page layout. But yeah, writing still is.
I think so. I think so. I would think of it more as a writing medium than an art medium in a way.
Yeah. Well, it's a creative writing seminar. Cool.
So what's the? I walked by Charles Adams
Oh yeah,
Museum or something.
he's an alum or something. So the college hall, like the big green
Yeah.
building, that's like what he was inspired for the house of the Adams family. So when you look at it, that's where Gomez
Yeah,
is.
but it says like gallery or something. So do they have a bunch of his art on display?
I think. Well, did you see like the weird silhouette?
Yeah,
things?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I wonder
So
what was inside the building, if anything, or is it just named after him?
I think it's just named after
Okay.
him, and he's an alum, so I think he's maybe given some money or a donor or something. But there's that pen link in
Is
that
that?
way.
I had no
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
I had no idea.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Hello. Hi. I'm so nervous. Greetings. I wrote that down. Greetings. Welcome to tonight's Bernheimer Symposium, featuring the acclaimed cartoonist and illustrator Adrian Tomine. You're all here, so you all know his work. It's amazing. We can agree. Ground rules, we agree on that. And it's captivating, and it's kind of impossible for me to describe in words because the whole point is that the pictures and the words work together, that it's evocative and sparse, but also incredibly highly detailed at the same time, and really funny and sometimes kind of grim. And I started reading it when I was younger than I am now, and appreciating that I could pick up copies of Optic Nerve at Chicago Comics and afford them. This was, when graphic narratives were starting to get very expensive and hard for me budgetarily. And I was absolutely captivated. It was one of my introductions, I know, into the world of grown-up graphic narrative. And he started with the DIY mini comic, like I said, the Optic Nerves and Optic Nerve singular, sorry. And those were collected into Sleepwalk and Other Stories, Summer Blonde, and Shortcomings, which is going to be a movie soon, directed by Randall Park. He went on to publish Scenes from an Impending Marriage, the New York Times bestseller Killing and Dying, and some of the most memorable New Yorker comics around Misconnections, which I think a lot of you have seen, and Love Life. And I am particularly fond of the parenting ones, which really stick with me. The Upstate, I think about all the time. I hate bugs. And he's written the extremely appropriate for the moment and on sale here, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist, which you can get copies of out there. I promised myself that I was not going to ask who and where you got the Nutella pizza that tried to kill you, but I have my guesses. And I'm also so thrilled that Associate Professor of English, Jean-Christophe Cloutier, who has agreed to interview. He's got such a wide range interest in all kinds of awesome things, but also has done so much for comics here at Penn. Really has made comics here at Penn be something. So if you are an undergraduate here and you are interested in learning about comics or making comics, JC is the person to talk to. I also have a lot of people to thank for this. First of all, thank you to Kate Levin, who supports the Bernheimer Symposium, which she established in memory of the comparative literature teacher and scholar here at Penn, Charles Bernheimer. More thanks to Jessica Lowenthal, who did a lot of hustling to make this happen, to Zach Gardner and Heidi Kalu, to our student staff, to JC, of course, and to our many, many co-sponsors, the SACS Program for Arts Innovation, the Asian American Studies Program, the Creative Writing Program, the Department of English, and the Emily and Jerry Spiegel Fund to support contemporary culture and visual arts, and the Lisa and Jeffrey Wilkes Family Foundation Artist Residency. At the end, we'll take a couple questions. We have an amazing print that's available for free. You should grab a copy of that, and it's over with the books. So, buy a book, grab a copy, grab the print, enjoy our reception, and there'll be a little bit of signing at the end as well. And that is all you need to hear from me, JC and Adrian Tomine.
Thank you. Thanks, Allie. So that's Allie. So also a big round of applause to thank her for all the setup. This was really her idea to make this happen. So thank you, and thank you, Adrian, for being here in conversation with me. It's really surreal and an honor to kind of be with the creator right now, since I've taught your work, for several years and just been a huge fan and admirer. So, so let's get into it. So as Ali said, Adrian began doing, Optic Nerve when you were still in high school, self-publishing.
Yeah.
In 1991, I think it was. This is, I think, issue 5. This is still when you're doing it yourself, right?
Yeah, that was. I think I was about 16. I was definitely in high school. The type I remember I joined the school newspaper staff so I could have access to their. I didn't have a computer and a printer at the time, so I joined the newspaper so I could use their equipment, and I'd printed out those things and glued them on for the covers.
Wow.
So that was, I was 15 or 16, I think.
And then in '95, you were picked up by Drawn & Quarterly, and look at the production value going out. And that and Drawn & Quarterly has been your publisher ever since, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And they're a really great publisher, I think, based out of Montreal.
Yeah,
my hometown.
Yeah, they were the company at the time that was publishing the most stuff that I was a fan of,
really?
Yeah, and so it's sort of, I guess it's sort of like, if a band idolizes some sort of record label or something and wishes they could be a part of that team.
And you get signed by that.
Yeah, it was like a dream come true for me, really. Like I mean, it didn't just happen out of the blue. I mean, I hounded them. I was sending them my mini comics and writing letters to them for several years, and for several years, or at least a year, I got no response. And then I've written about this, but the first response I got was from the founder and publisher, Chris Oliveros, and it was a very brutal criticism of my work on a ripped piece of paper with another cartoonist's artwork Xeroxed on the backside. He pulled it out of the recycling bin and wrote quickly everything that he didn't like about my work. But to me, that was like the most exciting thing I could get in the mail. It was like he, finally some response that he'd been looking at it all those.
That's interesting,
years.
and that's not in the loneliness of the long distance.
No, that's too positive. That's too upbeat of an anecdote.
One thing I want to also point out that's so great about the Optic Nerve issues is that you publish, letters from readers. They send it in the PO box, and even I have one of these, which is one of the latest ones, the penultimate one, number 13, and there's still letters in there.
Yeah, I still get them. I still have the PO box.
You still get them. And they're great because there's a lot of positive ones, but also I'm not sure about the artwork. Like someone writing that to you, and you're still kind of publishing that in there. So even the self-deprecating ones.
Yeah, that's one of the mild criticisms.
But you curate them yourself.
I did, and I created sort of a problem for myself by publishing some of the negative letters that I started to get the sense that people thought that the way to get their letter published was to be as big of an asshole as possible. Because once I started it, they just got more and more elaborate in their criticisms. So I kind of did that to myself, but I enjoy those. I miss that part of the comic for sure.
Well, it's great that you still have the PO box and that people are still sending them in.
Yeah, I mean, it's whittled down to a very specific population that's still sending letters to my PO box.
I'll send you one.
Yeah, okay.
So just wanted to show also just 25 years of publishing, right? More.
Yeah.
From 32 stories, which gathered all the Optic Nerve mini comics, Sleepwalk, Summer Blonde, Scrapbook, then the New York Sketches, which is kind of an earlier version in a way of the New York drawings.
Yeah.
Shortcomings, that was your first graphic novel.
Yeah, that's what they call it for marketing purposes.
Scenes from Impending Marriage, and then Killing and Dying, and the latest one from 2020. So, and I want to kind of start at the end, if you don't mind. So
sure.
With this, which is like we showed, right, just an amazing memoir, which won the Eisner, right, for best graphic memoir. Yes, and I just put that slide being the most famous. And the design of it, right, the moleskin aspect.
Yeah, there's a lot of trouble, especially during a pandemic.
It really?
Yeah. I mean, we were going into production on the book. Well, I mean, the best way to tell it is that we were we'd arranged to have it printed at a printing plant near a town in China called Wuhan, and they said, we think this might get delayed. Something's going on here.
Did you get the memo from Wuhan? Yeah.
So we scrambled and we moved it to a place in Italy, which, if you remember, was like one of the first European places to completely shut down. And they said, okay, this is going to be the last job that we can do. I mean, I got photos. The schools had actually shut down, and the printers had their kids sitting on the floor while they were printing this book.
Wow.
And then at the last minute, they said the bookmark ribbon.
Oh yeah.
Which I thought was a very important detail.
Yeah.
My publisher probably didn't, but they said we have to get that from China. So we had to order the ribbons from China to Italy to be bound into this book.
Wow.
And
So they
then
were all made there.
It was eventually shipped over here. Yeah, but yeah, I mean,
I think it was worthwhile.
to me,
I mean,
it felt like a miracle when I finally got it in my hands for a lot of reasons, even without the pandemic stuff. Just the process of trying to get printers to understand what I wanted it to look like. And
yeah. So this was your idea. You had this vision for the memoir to be basically in your sketchbook.
Yeah,
kind of.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And there were a lot of little details about it that, to me, were important, but added a lot to the expense. Like, well, I won't. I mean, it's too
Yeah.
nerdy to get into the details of it, but
Well,
it was a lot of effort. And
it's great.
my editor there, Tracy, worked really hard with me to make it happen. So,
Well,
I owe
we're
her a
all
lot.
grateful for
Yeah.
it and Tracy, because the intimacy that you get with it is kind of this, and it could, because the book also appears in the story.
Yeah,
like
that's
the
why
sketchbook, and
that
it's-
was the only defense I had when they were saying, like, we don't think we need that ribbon. We don't need to make it look like a notebook. I mean, there was talk about it just being just like a regular hardcover book,
Right.
You know, but I had written that ending where it sort of
Yes, the final
kind of
story.
becomes the book itself. So
Right.
I sort of forced
so
their hand a little bit.
I want to talk about the form of the memoir. So at some point, so this is like the prologue, right? Fresno, 1982, where you're still a child.
Yeah.
And but I was kind of curious. The form of it, you kind of settled. There's a memoir form that you have.
Yeah.
In Scenes from an Impending Marriage is also like this. So like in this one, this is a page from that book.
Yeah.
And it's got the squarish kind of panels with this kind of form. But I was looking over Scrapbook and some of the other available things, and I was wondering, when did you kind of decide on both the form of this form for your memoir, but also your avatar? Because I was looking at, so this is, the more cartoony version of you on the left here, right, when you're my first girlfriend, and here's more, to me, it looks like a Robert Crummy kind of emotional diarrhea kind of effect here.
Yeah, those are sketchbook things, and that's
Right.
where it kind of grew out of. In a lot of ways, I feel like the autobiographical stuff isn't. It's I don't know. I don't feel like I want to give it the effort of full color and everything in 2-point perspective and detailed backgrounds and everything. So a lot of it was just speed, like how quickly can I get the ideas out on paper.
Okay.
And that carried over onto the new book, which was or not the new book, but the most recent book, which was just a challenge to myself to try and get something done in a reasonable amount of time. Like
Right.
Killing and Dying took 7 years. So
Right, of course.
I was feeling like my life slipping
So
through my
it's
fingers.
more about saving time, because I was just wondering if if it took you a long time to get to this avatar. I mean, because I'm saying that someone like Alison Bechdel, who's also does a lot of graphic memoir, the avatar is doing so much work in terms
Yeah.
of like bringing you in, she's just so endearing.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and so glasses, no eyes, or those kinds of, are those kind of conscious choices? It just kind of came along and it developed into this form, and you're not.
That came from growing up reading Peanuts and the way Marcy was drawn. And to me, Peanuts was always just the best example of, communicating the maximum amount of, humanity with the smallest amount of detail. And so that was always a inspiration before I even really knew it was. It was like the first books that I learned to read. And a lot of those aspects of Schultz's style just sort of, as with everything I do feels like it's sort of absorbed from someone else in some way. And Schultz was the first for that.
Oh, interesting. And of course, in Killing and Dying, there's the horticulture, which is in a kind of a style like that.
Definitely.
So this one, San Diego, this is your first Comic-Con, and you're coming in there with, you're going to San Diego, and you have this, what did the great critic Robert Boyd say about my work, right? The best realist coming today. And then, so you're on this high, and it's such a heartbreaking episode, because then there's the Comics Journal publishes what I think is just an appalling, terrible review. I mean, the language used here, right? Like, haven't we seen a little too much of the hip, muted, fragmented, overly short stories that this moron is trying to pass off as fresh and original? It's like, isn't there an editor that I can say, we don't do that?
I know.
And then, but I'm the one.
Optic Nerve #1 sucked. That was what
I'm just wondering. So, how did it?
That was a great experience.
How did you live through that? How did you get through that?
It was important. I mean, I feel like every cartoonist should have their first work eviscerated. Yeah. I mean, it really. I think, especially now, there's such a tendency to praise and encourage and support each other, which I think is nice. I'm probably just jealous because I didn't have that at all. But I also think that it's important to get blasted with criticism, especially valid criticism, and learn from it. Well, I agree at this point. I do I do agree with a lot of it.
In hindsight, you agree.
Yeah. At that moment in the hotel room, I didn't agree with it. But it probably was not the best written criticism, but
it just seems such an angry, review.
Yeah, he's a Hollywood lawyer now, and he reached out to me and said that he would offer to represent me for free now if I need
as penance.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly have your revenge on that dude and on a lot of other dudes.
But similar to the negative letters that I used to print in the comic, I feel like I'm not. At first, there were people who were saying like, "Oh, you're trying to get people on your side by printing these negative things, and they're gonna." But maybe I was a little bit, but I was also giving some validity to those criticisms, and I honestly learned a lot from
you mean like by putting this in the memoir, you're
or just the experience,
visibility to
it, or the negative letters, or
right.
I've said before that it's easy to dismiss, like if you get one random criticism and you're like, oh, that's some psycho, what's his grudge, and then you open the mail and you get like 5 more letters saying the same thing. You're like, uh-oh, and that happened to me a lot in print, in criticisms, in letters from people, in going out to events and talking to people.
And in that restaurant with your wife, where she's not your wife yet.
That's right.
But it's the moment that you decide I'm going to marry
Yes.
her, because you overhear a conversation where someone is debating the validity of work, and she's loving it, and the other guy's saying, it's so pretentious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to this day, I still don't know the real explanation for how or why that could have happened.
And that happened. You just
it
there
actually happened. We sat down at a table,
Wow.
and in a typical Manhattan situation, you're like 6 inches away from the next table. And as soon as we sit down, the guy launches into a
into Summer Blonde, was it?
I think that might have been. I mean, it expanded to me in general as just a pernicious. But yeah, and so like we sat down, we hadn't even ordered yet, and he launches into it, and the woman at the table was kind of weakly defending my work a little bit, but she kind of quickly folded, and I guess he is kind of pretentious, and it is kind of bad.
It's almost like a fantasy, right? It's like being at your own funeral or something. Like you overhear someone talking about your work, but then like, wait a minute, it's not going how I hoped.
Right.
So there's another moment. This is the next year, the next Comic-Con, and you see Frank Miller, right?
Does anybody know who Frank Miller is?
So Frank Miller, the Dark Knight Returns, 1986, and he's got the Batman T-shirt as you draw him here, right? And so you're up for a prize, but the whole vignette of this segment is how you remember fondly reading Miller's work. Yeah. And you even at this page, maybe we'll become pals.
That was the most embarrassing admission of this. Everybody thinks like, I can't believe you showed yourself crying, but it was that I used to be a Frank Miller fan.
Oh, right. Now it's embarrassing.
That was hard for me to write. Yeah.
And then he doesn't even try to pronounce
Yeah,
name,
that's been verified. After this came out, the woman who used to run Comic-Con sent me a letter saying, like, I remember that so clearly, and I'm so sorry that happened. And yeah, he just was reading all the nominees, and when he got to me, he didn't want to. I can't believe I'm saying this, but in Frank Miller's defense, I was a little dismayed that when this was published, there was a sort of this reaction like, he's racist, and he was doing that against you because it's Asian hate or something like that. And I was like, no, it was, I mean, I think he was just drunk, really, and he didn't want to stumble and mispronounce, and so he just said, like, I'm not going to even try and say that one, and it got a big laugh from the audience.
Of course,
and subsequent to that, I've had a handful of very pleasant interactions with him too.
Oh, really?
So I felt a little bad about doing this, but
it
had to be done.
I think it had to be done. I mean, because the acknowledgments in the book, right? You say thanks most of all to all the long distance cartoonists who through their work, advice, and example taught me everything. And so there's.
I didn't mean him.
That's what I mean. Like there's rival. In the book, there's this camaraderie with like Seth, say, and others. But there's also hardships and betrayals, and meeting your heroes is not always the best thing. Right?
Yeah, like when I won't say who it was, but when I met an older cartoonist at a New Yorker party, and I introduced myself. This was a racist incident, actually. When I introduced myself to him, and he said, "Are you Japanese?" and I said, "Yes," and he just said, "I love jujitsu."
Oh yeah,
and walked away.
That's how you end one of the vignettes. I love jujitsu. Yeah. Thanks, buddy. Yeah. Well, so the follow-up vignette. Did this also really
that
happen?
Yellow Bastard.
So that's a Frank Miller comic too, for the Sin City volumes. That's
when I was starting to think maybe it was racist, actually.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, is this like that? And then Seth says a perfect placement to right above your seat. Like, so you had to sit under a poster that said "That Yellow Bastard."
In Albany, yeah. We got there, and the store owner was like, "Here's your seat, Adrian." And there was a giant sign behind me that said "That Yellow Bastard." There's a photo of me somewhere where I'm just sitting there with the words right behind me.
Because I was wondering if that was also like in the comic, that how you in the memoir, how you framed it, like it's like another subtle dig back at Miller, like his racism.
Well, I mean, again, to be fair, if anyone's ever read that book, it's not a racial thing.
No, it's an actual yellow dude. Yeah, like a creature.
Yeah, it just became racial in the context of me.
Right.
But yeah, at that moment, I did have that feeling that maybe Frank Miller is some...
Maybe he's after me some other way. So there's another kind of rivalry that happens, but with an unseen figure, Neil Gaiman, right?
Oh, yeah.
of Sandman fame, which is back in the news a lot these days with the Netflix adaptation.
That's right, yeah.
But this is amazing to me, like this cruise, celebrity guest cruise, right?
Well,
Pacific
say no more. That's amazing enough. Yeah, there was a comic book cruise in 2001, and they invited me for some reason, and we were trapped on a boat for 7 days. But yeah, for me, the jokes about Neil Gaiman are different because he has been genuinely nice to me, and I've had a nice relationship with him. He was really one of the first people who reached out to me when I was making my mini comics just out of the blue. Somehow he got my address, and I got a postcard from him about
Optic Nerve.
Optic Nerve, yeah. So it's not about him per se, but it's just the fact that at this time in the world of alternative comics, basically everyone was living under the shadow of Neil Gaiman.
Sure.
And so on this cruise, they had some system where every night the guests rotated and got to sit and have dinner with a different cartoonist, and every night I'd sit there and the people with their Sandman t-shirts would come up and they'd look at
she's got death on her
death,
t-shirt.
yeah, and they'd have their assignment and then they'd look and see and go, so she was actually holding back tears when she sat down.
Oh man.
And then
they're just trying to. They don't want you to speak so they can hear what Neil Gaiman.
Yeah,
is
he
saying.
was a few tables away, and every once in a while he would say some.
Talking about Sequest.
Oh yeah, you're right. You read it. Oh my God, I can't believe. Yeah, that was. He actually. Our conversation paused, and we heard him say, "I will write an episode of Sequest."
One of my favorite moments too is just you say hi, I'm Adrian, and the guy says, yeah, like as in, yeah, that's you, like the one I don't want to be with. Or something. And then Gaiman Returns, where you're going to the New York Book Fair with Sarah, and then there's a huge line, and I love this on the left, the panel on the left. At the bottom, fuck yeah! All those years of isolation and hard work have finally paid off. And then, you're Neil Gaiman? No.
Oh, yeah.
And then they move you to, oh, yeah, you're over here at this other table.
Yeah, I didn't look at the directions for where I was supposed to be seated. So when we turned the corner and saw the long line, I thought, wow, I'm doing great in New York. And then
there's so many moments like that where you're like, this has happened. Finally, I've made
the Tiger
it.
Woods
and then,
fist pump.
Oh, no. The reality comes back and it's Neil Gaiman. So in relation to that, too, so there's this one I wanted to ask about. This this is an event where you're wedged between two speakers, like, this somber, eloquent reading from a deeply moving historical novel. And then there's this other author who comes back, who won the Governor General Literary Award. And you're in between and you make a lot of jokes. And then she says, well, gosh, if I'd have known what the last guy was going to do, I would have drawn some little pictures for you, too. Yeah. So do you think, so this is 2004 in Toronto, Ontarians are such fucking assholes, right?
No,
I'm kidding. I can say that because I'm from Quebec, so. But the idea is, do you still think, like, when you go to events now, is there still that snobbery against comics, or has that changed since 2004?
I think it's changed a little bit. I mean, to me, this was important to include because I was the first cartoonist to be a guest at this literary festival, and I think it was a real turning point, and there were some glitches in that. And, I sort of gloss over what I did, but again, to be fair, I really kind of had a chip on my shoulder. I could sense the tone of the room, and I was like, all right, you guys might not respect me, but I'm gonna get you to laugh. I'm gonna make this fun because everything else is really boring. So I did a whole reading of a strip about a character named Long Duck Dong from 16 Candles, and it's like this pretty broad. I think there's some kids here, so maybe I shouldn't say what the last line of the strip was, but it's very, R-rated, and it got this. The audience kind of gasped and got a big laugh and everything. So I wasn't trying to fit in. I wasn't trying to get up there and be as literary as possible and read some.
So you had your own kind of sense of, I should be funny because I'm a comics guy? Or?
It was like kind of a youthful rebellion kind of thing. I was like, everybody's, snobby and stuffy here, so I'm going to force them to laugh with this lowbrow humor or something. And then the woman who had, I feel bad because then the order of it was weird, so that I went second, and then the third author came up with her very serious thing, and I kind of messed up the mood.
So she was self-conscious about the seriousness of her own thing.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting, but I'm glad to hear that it's not, the snobbery is not there as much as it used to.
No, I don't think I've gone. That's the Harborfront Festival. I called it something different. I called it Tea Laugh, but it's the Harborfront Festival in Toronto, and I've gone a bunch of times, and it's great. I think what they should get credit for was sort of blazing the trail a little bit
by inviting you in the first place, right? Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So that's good to know. I reconcile myself with the Ontarians. So the final vignette I want to just bring up from Long Distance is the longest one, which is it takes a lot of the space in the story, and you have a health scare, and you think you're having a heart attack. Your doctor thinks you're having a heart attack. You have to go to the emergency room, and you decide to kind of write this really heartfelt letter. And in terms of form, it really strikes you because you've been giving us the square for 100 pages and more. Yeah. And now you get this page, and so both visually, that this is something that is different from the ontology of your life, far as you've been depicting it. So has this kind of experience, has it had a lasting effect on you? Has it?
Yeah, I
changed?
think so. I mean, in a lot of ways, but just to talk specifically about this, it was important to me. I don't know if anyone's an aspiring cartoonist here, but one of the nice things about working in print is that you have pages that turn, and there's a real effect from. You can have a surprise effect by turning a page. And so I did a lot of work to make sure that this one ended up on a even number page, which would be you flip it over and then you see it.
And then you see it, right.
Which is, I know there's ways that you can have those kinds of surprises with scrolling and everything like that, but
Right.
It's something that I love about print, and that was something that I wanted to do and have that be kind of a surprise when you turn that page.
Yeah.
In terms of lasting effects on me, yeah, I mean, I exercise now, for one thing, which I remember at the time when they were going to release me, this nurse was giving me this kind of quiz, and she was like, do you drink caffeine? I was like, yeah, I drink like 6 cups of coffee a day. And do you drink seltzer? Yes. 4 cans a day. Do you eat spicy? Yeah. And then she said, do you exercise? And I can't remember what the exact exchange was, but
Right.
I didn't want to just say no, so I kept saying like, well, I walk, and she's like, outdoors? And I was like, well. But yeah, so yeah, I think so. I think the whole book itself really kind of grew around this experience, even though there's a lot of stuff leading up to it. The creation of the book was sparked because of that experience.
Right.
And I think, and the fact that the book was drawn, like I said, in this way that was meant to be done quickly and economically, had a lot to do with the feeling of being aware that my, children's life was sort of passing by while I was sitting at a drafting table all day
Right.
long. So I think that sort of, affected me, opened my eyes a little bit, and gave me the idea for writing the book, but also gave me the idea for the form and the style of the book, which is like, don't be so precious, and don't,
Right.
people can still get something out of your work, even if it's not in, every line is drawn with a ruler and in precise perspective. I mean, like, some of the older books were, now, especially at this point in my life, seem insane. The kind of,
The labor.
yeah,
detail.
like Shortcomings was all set in actual locations, kind of like as if I was making a movie. I would go out and find the actual locations and take photos and
Wow.
do reference drawings, and I think the number of people who recognize that is like 1 or 2. Like no,
Right.
like my other
Right.
cartoonist friends from Berkeley said, "Hey, you drew the Mexican restaurant" or something, but
Right.
no one else noticed it. And so I felt like when I got to this point in my life, I felt like maybe at some point I'll go back to that method of working, but right now I don't really have any interest in it.
Right, you save more time and you get more work. That's fascinating. And parenting, I feel, your last 2 books has really kind of risen up. And you're right. I mean, and that's how you tell us that this is the inspiration for the book, in the sense that the memoir also goes to, spoiler alert, goes to.
I don't die.
Yeah, you don't. And you kind of go to this place. I don't know if this is still your drafting table, but
Yeah.
you go and you kind of create. You do the first page, Fresno, 1982.
Yeah.
And you kind of give us that. Is this still where the magic happens?
That's the same
draft.
drafting
Yeah.
table that I bought from Blick when I first moved to New York. I've had 2 drafting tables in my life. One I got when I was about 8 years old, and I kept it until I moved away from California
Wow.
in 2003.
So all the optic nerves were on that.
Yeah. And then when I got to New York, I bought this one, and I'm still using that one.
Wow. So great, thank you. So let's just. I thought we could switch over to some of your other work as an illustrator,
Sure.
because I think somewhere, I can't remember where, but you do say that some of the first real money you made as an artist was through illustrations, or as
Yeah.
a commercial artist in that way, rather. And so this was, this book is so gorgeous, and this is Missed Connections, right? That image, and there we get. Not only do we get some of your covers and your illustration work, but we also get some of your sketches, which is super precious and great, I think, to get to see that. And we also see that in Scrapbook, and I love this in Scrapbook. If I could turn myself invisible, I'd have the best sketchbook
Yes.
ever. And you got the people looking at you, surrounding you, and I wonder if you could say just a few words about the relationship, like your relationship with your scrapbook, like a cartoonist relationship. Because when we do the Making Comics seminar here, we force every student to just do a sketchbook, even if they don't draw. Like, just every day you have to draw in your sketchbook and make it a practice. Like,
Yeah.
do you still do that every day?
I do, yeah. I don't know, not every day, but yeah. And
Just some more
I'm not
sketches.
I'm not like a compulsive doodler. You know, like I have a lot of friends, cartoonist friends, who just can't not be drawing. Like you be trying to have a conversation with them, and I'm listening, and they're, you know, drawing. And I never had that quite that level of obsession. And a lot of my sketchbooks, if you look through them, it's all preparatory work for something that later got published or something.
Well,
like
that's
that.
what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Like, is this where you get like you do it and then you look for postures, inspiration of characters?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. A lot of stuff. There's just some life drawing, but a lot of times it's just like if I'm working on a story, there's pages and pages of trying to figure out like what does the dad in Killing and Dying look like?
Right.
You know, and there's just different.
And you look in your sketchbook like, did I see
Well,
someone? Did I draw someone?
no, the process is
Right.
that'll be my task when I sit down and I'll draw one. No, I don't like that, and I'll draw another one, and you know, take elements of it that I like or don't like, and
Right.
discard them.
But it's like, but now are you like always recognized if you're on the subway and trying to? You can't.
Not in New York. No.
I wanted to show this because these are the only two
Oh, God.
I found of you drawing superheroes, and I love that. You know,
These were both with kind of guns to my head.
oh really? Because it says untitled,
I know.
unpublished. So it's like, did he just do it because he loves Batman, or
No.
And then Summer Blockbuster. The detail I love about this is that you
Does he really just love Men in Black?
but that you said your love of Romita, right, and
Oh, yeah.
Spider-Man, you drew that Spider-Man by memory, whereas the others you had to get reference images.
Well, yeah. Well, that was okay. So this was for this was a birthday present for a guy named Chip Kidd, who is a famous Batman fan, and I knew that's what he would want for his birthday, so I did that.
Nice. I love the Batman, by the way. I love your choice of like the era.
This was an assignment. I needed money, and I took an assignment from Esquire magazine, and it was about summer blockbusters, and in 2002.
2002.
So, but yeah, that Spider-Man came after a lot of argument back and forth because I kept drawing him like John Romita, and they're like,
Right.
no, it's supposed to look like Tobey Maguire in a costume or something. Yeah, so those were, yeah.
Would you ever like, if you had to, like, would it be one
get
of
asked
these
this
two?
all the time.
I know you
I
must.
don't know
be,
why
right?
this comes up all the time.
We want you to.
Well, the story that I tell is that back at some point when I used to go to San Diego Comic-Con, some guy from Marvel came up to me and he was like, what if we just gave you your own miniseries and you could, he had some phrase like, you could play in our sandbox and do whatever you want, you know. What would you do? And it was like I was supposed to be ready with a pitch at that moment or something.
Right.
And I had this crazy idea of like, well, maybe, you know, I said when I was a kid, I liked the stuff in Spider-Man that had to do with Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy and Flash Thompson and them going to the coffee shop and everything. So what if it was just a story about like all that stuff, and like every 20 pages Peter Parker would be like, oh shit, sorry, I gotta go do something, and he'd leave and then come back and be like, okay, so anyway.
That would be great.
Yeah. And the guy just looked at me like, you son of, like he just looked like I had just, you know,
that would be amazing.
Insulted his religion or something.
That would be amazing. It's like the Gotham PD that they did, where you just see the police working and Batman shows up.
Oh, really?
In a few
Someone
panels
did
and then
that.
disappears. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it would be like Optic Nerve, but
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
but it's Peter Parker.
Yeah, he was disgusted with the idea, so
God.
never went anywhere.
So I want to show a few covers that you've done as well. And one of the things we noticed quickly, I think, if you start to look at a lot of your New Yorker covers, is books. Mm-hmm. Like you feature a lot of print books, people reading books. Here we got International Incident. You have Board of Tourism, and so she's in New York, but she's, you know, looks like a J.D. Salinger cover to me. But
Yeah.
like,
I remember at this period when I was doing a lot of these covers, someone posted something online that said, Adrian Tomine is the people read artist, and Chris Ware is the iPhones exist artist.
wow. That's right. A lot of his covers have icons.
Yeah. He does make that point.
This one, right? Shelf life, the whole kind of
Yeah.
path, which is it reminds me of this Chris Ware. Speaking of Chris Ware, the back of the paperback of Jimmy Corrigan is like
Oh, yeah.
the making of the book, and then it's
Yeah,
thrown in the
that's right,
dumpster
that's
as well.
right.
And then Red the era of Amazon. She's looking kind of
Yeah,
guilty for
which was
right next to the bookstore.
And the interesting anecdote about that is when it was published, Amazon contacted the New Yorker and ordered like 25 prints of that cover to put in their office. Kind of like
motivational.
Well, like they flipped it. Like they're like, yeah, we killed them. Yeah.
Oh man, are you guilty now?
Well, it's also very popular among independent booksellers too. So I'm happy. with that.
Both are happy.
Yeah.
And this example is in New York. It's suiting up the New Yorker, but it's unpublished. So
unpublished because David Remnick is a Yankees fan.
You're kidding.
No.
So what happened? Did you still get paid though?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
As long as you still get paid.
I was sad that one didn't run. I like that one.
Yeah, I love this one. Yeah. But so that happens, but you still get paid as an artist. So a good lesson here. Know your boss.
The New Yorker is very generous. Where if an illustration gets to any reasonable phase of completion, not even quite this far along, they don't leave you high and dry.
Right.
So yeah.
So there it is. Wow, I had no idea that's what that reason was. So you've also done, some great covers that's evoke pandemic life. This one, maybe the most famous, with a Zoom date,
That's
right?
Yeah.
She's all the way, whatever the screen will see, the camera will capture. She's all dolled up, right? And then the bottom, the mess, the cat, the Amazon boxes again.
Yeah.
So what was your inspiration for this?
What was your inspiration for this?
I mean, the pills, so we don't see the pills.
Oh yeah, medicine, Chinese takeout. Most of this stuff was from our apartment. There's our hand weights. There's our cats.
Is this the memoir? Just looking at the bottom. For the
Yeah,
first time.
that was I advertised my own book on the cover of the New Yorker.
I just noticed that.
They said that
It must have just been released.
it had been, and they said, as much as we'd like to help you out, there's some sort of ethical thing about doing a review of one of our artists' books or something
in the
like.
New Yorker.
Yeah, so I was like, I'll get it on there
put
somehow.
It in there. This is how we all taught in 2020.
Yeah.
We were all not wearing pants.
Yeah, and there's our rice cooker up there. That was all. A lot of Asian people noticed that one.
It's so great. It's so beautiful. This image.
So there's all. I was looking through, for this event, the scrapbook, and I found these other images that really evoked the pandemic for me. But it was before the pandemic. But so this one, when anxiety is at the table, and I noticed that the cook is like coughing.
Oh yeah.
The chef is just and if this waitress had a mask on, it could be right now.
Yeah. I can't remember. I actually think that this article was about OCD or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this one also just eerily,
yeah.
in a dark way, just kind of an image of people we've lost, kind of.
Yeah, that was a review of a novel called The Leftovers.
The one that became an HBO show.
It became an HBO show.
Like a rapture moment.
Yeah,
right?
and in their title sequence for one of the seasons, they did a very similar thing where they had like the white silhouettes of people disappearing out of photos.
Oh, wow.
But it was I think the novel was more of kind of reflective of like 9/11, and then the TV show took it more into a different realm. But
but it was kind of eerie, and beautifully eerie in the sense of how an image that's about something else can still capture a future moment of loss or something. All right, so that's it for the illustrations. Now, want to talk about Killing and Dying. It was from 2015, short story. So if you're not familiar with it, it's 6 stories, right? A brief history of the art form known as horticulture. Amber Sweet, Go Owls, translated from the Japanese. Killing and Dying, and Intruders. This, I've taught this book several times. It's just such heartbreakingly beautiful.
Thank you.
And one thing that you do in this book is you have these paratextual kind of images, like single page, full page images like these. So
Horticulture, Amber Sweet.
Oh, sorry.
Go Owls, then translated from the Japanese, and then Killing and Dying, the eponymous, the title, and then Intruders.
Mm-hmm.
So what inspired you for that? What was the epiphany to I want to use this? And this one, for horticulture, it's such a much more intricate, beautiful version of what he does. What he does is so unattractive.
That's supposed to be one of his sketches, though.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a part where I think it's...
But not one of his sculptures.
No.
It's one of his own sketches, I see.
His wife is talking to him about some bills that need to be paid, and he's doodling in a
right.
little sketchbook or something. So that's supposed to be one of his...
Because they always evoke the story in a kind of interesting way, but I hadn't seen you do that before. So
I've always had sort of a concurrent interest with graphic design in addition to cartooning, and I just wanted to take the opportunity. This was the first time I got to do an original full color book, and so I felt like I had all these possibilities to do things like use color to make it look like a Muji notebook opened up, or things like that. So I was just having fun with the opportunity that I had for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because I make my students spend a lot of time thinking about
Oh
this.
yeah,
But it's just what it evokes in the story. I think it's always kind of an interesting choice.
That's the fake brick wall that the kid does the comedy routine in front of.
Right.
In Killing and Dying.
Killing and Dying.
And that's the floor plan that the guy in Intruders
of his
makes.
former house that he then breaks into, and it's no longer his house.
Yeah.
So one of the things about Killing and Dying, if you haven't read it, is just this amazing tour de force of the versatility of the form of comics, like everything you can do with comics, kind of.
That's
right?
nice. Thank you.
And so this example here is from Horticulture, and it's really based on newspaper comic strips, right? Like Peanuts kind of thing, exactly the same kind of format. And then you get 6 days of the week, right? Monday and then through Saturday, and then you get the Sunday edition full color page, and that's how you follow. And you follow an entire, not an entire life, but quite a few years of this family's life in this
5 or 6 years
format. So what inspired you to do that, and why for this story? Was that the form? I'm going to do this form.
At that time, I just happened to be reading there was all those nice reprints of old comic strips that were coming out at the time, and some of it was nostalgic for me, some of it was discovery, but I was reading Peanuts again, and the Gasoline Alley reprints that Drone and Corley did,
Frank King,
where the characters age throughout the strip. You really see a little baby grow up and become a man. And
right. Unlike
have
The
kids over time.
Simpsons, who they never age. This was a family that, if you were readers of Frank King's Gasoline Alley, you would see them age.
Yeah. So that was really inspirational to me. I'd also somehow never read the comic strip of Little Orphan Annie, and those were starting to get republished at the time, and I really enjoyed those. Harold Gray, I just loved his artwork so much. And but really, probably Peanuts is still the biggest influence. And, I think it was just because I was inspired, and I wanted, I wasn't actually going to get a newspaper strip or anything like that, but I would, try my hand at it in a limited way. But also, part of the project of this whole book was that I was feeling kind of in a rut with how I'd been making comics for basically my whole life, and coming off of working on Shortcomings for 5 years or something.
Right.
The last thing I wanted to do was just repeat that process all over again. So with this book, I kind of gave myself the challenge of each story had to be written in a different manner, like a different process for writing it, and it had to be drawn differently in a different format, different style, with different tools.
Oh, really? Even at
I'd been using the same tools for 30 years or whatever, and so I was like, each story I'm gonna go to the art store, or not even the art store. So like Killing and Dying, I was like, let me see if I can do a story with material that I can only get at the Rite Aid up the street. So I got I got typing paper and a mechanical pencil, and I think that's it. I had a ballpoint pen for the lettering.
I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that you had forced yourself. Everything would be different, a different form. But you even changed your tools as an artist.
Yeah, different. I mean, stuff that no one would care about, but like different paper, and
right.
I was just getting so sick of how obsessive I'd become about. Because at the time there was sort of like this like cult of how comics must be made, and these are the correct tools, and I felt really, trapped by that to a degree, that like you have to use Strathmore 500 Bristol board with a vellum surface, and even though it costs $25 a sheet and you have to cut it down and all this stuff. So I thought, like, what would happen if I just bought a tablet of this crappy manga paper, at the art store? Okay, it worked fine,
Amazing.
Or what if I just used typing paper from Rite Aid? Okay,
wow.
it looks fine. And so I became really, a lot of times when I did like this Substack thing, and I've answered questions, and a lot of times aspiring cartoonists are like, well, what tools?
Right.
And I'm really adamant about not answering that question, because I don't want someone to make a list and be like, okay, so I now have to get Strathmore 500 Bristol board, and,
so whatever works.
Yeah, whatever works, really.
Amazing.
So anyway, that was part of the project, and so for this story, I wanted to see if I could just make artwork that kind of looked like an old newspaper strip.
Right. So I have a few ones that I want to get to, and the time is running. So I want to,
sure.
But so Intruders is kind of it's a 9-panel grid, but no rigid forms.
Yeah.
But it sticks to the 9-panel grid. Go Owls is a 12-panel grid, but then you have like a horizontal kind of splice in a couple of occasions, right? Except, and here at the bottom on the left side, where it's the first instance of domestic abuse in the story, where you change the form, you tip it vertically for that size of panel on the left here at the bottom tier. And the silence of that panel, the disappearance of the background is just so striking. And it truly marks that moment as different from everything else that's taken place. And just with the tipping of the form like that, just so masterful. And one thing I wanted to mention that some of my students noticed is that she always walks to the right throughout the story, right? Or she's facing the right, and as she gets deeper and deeper into this bad relationship, always, and then at the top left, top right at the top, but at the end she walks left. Now, was that a conscious choice? Like she's going in a different. And this is one of the ways we can read this as she's freeing herself from this relationship.
Yeah. I mean, people have read that in different ways.
This is the final page.
A lot of this is sort of built on a grammar that's been established in cinema, and
right,
especially Western cinema. So typically, when you see a plane flying from left to right, that means they're like moving forward. It's like progress, since that's the way we read. So I mean, I don't ever want to like weigh in too heavily with what I was intending or anything. But yeah, the movement within the panels was something that I was conscious of, and I think that it's like an important kind of invisible, subliminal part of cartooning that when I'm looking at an artist's work, that's something that either they're conscious of or they're not. And even if it's not to have a thematic resonance, a lot of times it really helps with just clarity of storytelling. And sometimes you'll see a comic where a person's walking this way and that way, and it's confusing what the spatial relationship is.
Right. It can be done, if it's done badly, it can just kind of look like a mess. But this seemed like, because her figure is, you know that you're splicing her figure, or, not showing her whole body in this way, but showing movement in a different way. So just amazing. These subtle ways that this is, to me, close reading comics is closer to poetry, close reading, than it is like fiction, because it's really about beats, about form in that specific kind of way. Translated from the Japanese, just this one makes me cry every time I read it. It's just so beautiful. The way that just the beauty of it, the detail, and we never see, or we don't know, we're never for sure if we ever see who we're talking about. The letter, it's a letter, it seems to be a letter. It's a one-voice narration that's translated from the Japanese, with the comma in the title, and you never know, until the end what it's really about. But you never show us, the figures, the narrator necessarily. But you evoke so much with the landscapes and the Denny's that also. Only Amber Sweet doesn't have Denny's in it. In all of Killing.
There's a lot of Denny's in the book.
There's a lot of Denny's.
I didn't get anything from them. I thought they'd reach out to me with a free breakfast or something.
But even the light bulb, I spent a long time just looking at that.
Well, the starting point for the art style on this one was that I I'd gone a number of years of working on my comic and feeling whatever comic I was working on at the time, like say Shortcomings, and feeling like I had to work really quickly to try and tell this long story. And then I'd get an assignment from the New Yorker, and I'd put that aside, and I'd spend like a month lavishing attention on one image for the New Yorker. And I had this feeling of like, why can't I put that kind of care into something for me instead of for someone else? And so that was just the idea, was to like treat each panel as if it was like a New Yorker illustration, and put the amount of work into one, like that one, into one page,
Right.
that I would for a New Yorker cover, and have it be in service of my own thing.
Right. But what's particularly just kind of so gorgeous about this story, not is just the writing is also so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's also it's in translation mode.
Right.
Right, like that last line, can you believe your parents came so close to breaking instead of breaking up?
Yeah.
But because of the translation, that broken English aspect evokes so much more beauty.
Yeah, it was fun. It gave me room to write differently, and to sort of have that last line wouldn't have that ambiguity if it was written in
just
a
like
different
regular-
voice.
Yeah. It makes really an impact.
Thank you.
So Amber Sweet, it's been a few things on Amber Sweet. This one kind of moves around, doesn't follow necessarily a grid pattern like some of the others, full color.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing I wanted to show is that in 2008, so what's that, 7 years before the release of Killing and Dying, you did this version of the same story, My Porno Doppelganger, in Kramer's Ergot from 2008, which is essentially the same story, but told in two giant. And I just want to say, this is giant, so just as a scale.
Wow! Did you take that picture?
Yeah, just today.
Nice.
This
Amazing.
this is Killing and Dying at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And this is so it's a gigantic book, the Kramer's Ergot edition.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating to me is it's like a window into your writing process.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that. Not many people not many people could afford the big book, so I felt like it was.
I know. I'm
kinda
very
hidden.
lucky to have a research fund there.
Wow.
But but there's some elements that are the same. All right. So some
Yeah.
of these images here, like the bottom one where she's
Yeah.
looking at the car, and then here you can see the same kind of image on the right.
Yeah.
But there's some different things like.
Oh God.
So, I know, but so one of the things you said here, right, in about this is that I love this line. So my hunch is that someone reading a comic would naturally be open to the idea of an unreliable narrator or dialogue, but would often assume that what they're looking at visually is a kind of documentary film of the action. But in a lot of ways, I was enjoying the idea of running through that filter of a character's perception, even down to the drawing style, which intentionally changed from story to story. So I feel that that's everywhere in Killing and Dying, but especially here, because
You're right.
here she says, and on the right in Killing in Amber Sweet, I couldn't figure out how to get online. I ended up stumbling upon something I wished I hadn't. So she says I stumbled upon something, but the image is clearly showing her clicking on find and then searching for Amber Sweet.
Yeah.
Whereas here on the left in your earlier version, it's the history of his browser history.
Oh yeah.
And so that is clearly just what he had done. But
Yeah.
here is she's really looking for it. It's not a stumbling. And so I was just wondering if that's part of the process of you wanting to emphasize the way in which like free and direct discourse or kind of subjectivity can also invade the images in a comic, not just the.
Yeah, I wanted the story by the end that you kind of call into question everything about it, about the veracity of it, I mean, in my mind, I have a very clear, real narrative of what really happened during this time,
Right.
and then how that got translated into what this story is, but that's sort of the dissonance there. I think is more interesting if I don't come out and just say actually.
Okay, yeah. But what's also fascinating is there's these beats or these moments that you knew you wanted to have and you kept them, like the darkness of when they're having sex here right at the top and here, and the cutting of the hair, like that beat. That darkness on the page is there in both stories. And at the end, there's an embrace. And the last beat of the story is also a girl and a new boyfriend, being told.
You
this
don't
kind
know
of
that.
story. Or yeah, I guess we don't know that. Or that's how we interpret it.
Yeah.
Or how I interpret
Yeah.
it. But so it's just fascinating to me how there's things that you kind of seem to know. I want my story to go there at the end, and I want it to be outside. I want two people on the grass, but the rest can change.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I don't want to say too much other than that last panel was important to me, because what I wanted it to imply was that sometimes, what could I say?
You don't have to say.
Yeah, well,
we could just leave it
okay,
as ambiguous.
just that to me that acceptance, that last line is very romantic.
Okay.
It was very,
Yes.
it's a very loving acceptance of the story that they just heard.
All right. Well, so we're getting to that time. This just other examples of things you changing in the story. How Ryan get away.
Mm-hmm.
This Killing and Dying 20 panel grid. So
This is the Rite Aid
This
story,
is the
by
Rite
the way.
Aid. That's amazing because
Typing paper and a
it's
mechanical
even harder
pencil.
to get detail right because you have to work with such small panels, right?
No, the panels were big. I drew each panel on a sheet of typing paper.
Okay.
And then scanned them in.
Okay. But one of the things that the effect of having all these panels is that when you change the grid, the effect is that much more stark as visually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is an interesting kind of technique of laughter, like just not showing the audience, but just telling us what's happening. But then, of course, famously, I think you've kind of ripped out a panel that. And I had never really seen that before in a comic. The closest thing I came up with was kind of this little Sammy Sneeze from Winsor McCay.
I know that one, yeah.
He breaks the frame, and it kind of the ontology of the world is kind of changed in that way, right, from the comic. But here is very, that's new. Like, what gave you the inspiration? Because one of the things you said also in an interview is like, I was working with how much can I remove and take away and get away with it?
Yeah.
And I think you even mentioned like cutting things up and moving panels around. Like, did this happen in a moment where I'm gonna just rip this one out?
No, that was an edit that was done in my mind, just because when I started on this story, I was the challenge of this one, aside from drawing with Rite Aid materials, but was to say, can I go into this minefield of subject matter, of all these things that have been so overly sentimentalized and can be so cloying and so cheap in their depiction of very serious human experience. And it's a pretty cocky, now that I feel very removed from the person who wrote this story at this point, and I feel like, Jesus, who did I think I was to try that? But because it's to try and say, like, can I throw myself into these waters that I are probably too deep for me, and can I sort of survive? Can I find a way to swim? So the subject matter with
the death of a parent,
death of a spouse. I at that point did not have a child who was that age. I do now, which is very strange. But so it was sort of like, and it's tricky. There's a lot of discussion about this now, but I was really trying to put myself into the shoes of people that were not me. That was another project of the whole book, is that I was sick of I'd done this book that everybody totally mistakenly took to be autobiographical.
Shortcomings?
Yeah. And I was like, I don't want to draw that character or anything like that, and I don't want to write about my own specific world and my own experiences. So every story in this book was me trying to sort of invent a world, invent characters, and then really try and inhabit their lives and write from a certain perspective. Right. And so those blank panels were, I don't know, maybe they were a cheat, but for me they were a way of avoiding some of the real sentimentality that might be associated with a story like this. In my mind, it's also a story that's sort of told from the daughter's perspective in a lot of ways, and I think I was trying to show that there were certain moments that were just too painful for her to remember.
Oh wow, yeah. I think you pull it off. It's not cheap. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant move to rip the part of the universe that you're reading, that loss. The absence of the panel evokes grief and loss in ways that couldn't be achieved, I think, in other mediums. I think that's part of the beauty of you having achieved this in comics.
Well, I was really trying to really try and recapture my love of the comics medium, and trying to really, I think I've talked about this in the past, but I think when I started out working professionally, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. At the time, comics still were not as accepted, and I was really working in response to mainstream comics, superhero comics.
Right.
And so I was really like, I want to differentiate myself. So I'm not going to have sound effects, and I'm not going to have thought balloons, and I'm not going to, all these things that I thought were too cartoony. And at a certain point, I thought, that's ridiculous. Like, it's just a neutral, in reality, it's a neutral language that can be used to tell any kind of story, and you should take advantage of every tool. It'd be like a filmmaker now saying, like, well, I'm not going to use sound because that's too mainstream or something. And so with this book, I was like, let me try and get back into it. Let me try and use, like, I don't want it to just be like, I think also at the time I was starting to be aware that there were a lot of graphic novels that were coming out that were like, this could have just been a novel, or this could have been a film and it didn't get bought, so they turned the screenplay into a comic. So I was like, let me really make this a real comic, and let me use the language of comics in every way I can to tell the story.
You did it. I just want to show also this is in my office.
What's that?
Like, if you go to my office, like, that's actually literally hanging on my wall. It's one of my favorite panels.
I predicted my life as a parent.
So also wanted to make sure to talk about that cinema has come calling for you now. So last year,
Cinema comes calling.
There's Olympiad
the headline
has been released, right? Which is based on 3 of your stories. That's did that poster, right? For it.
Yes.
That's
yes.
your
We do have
work.
to let people know that this film did get released.
Yes, it's. I watched it over the weekend. It's a great film.
It does exist.
It's fascinating to see how they spliced together the stories, but also just maybe you want to talk about the freshest thing for you. You wrote the screenplay for Shortcomings, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
so I found on IMDb, right, who's playing who.
Look at you. You put this together.
So you talk about how, like, is it set today, or did you set it back in the mid 2000s?
All right. First of all, I got to say, these actors are forced to take these kind of Hollywood headshots, and they have to pose in certain ways and everything, and they don't look like that at all in the movie.
Okay.
What was the question?
Well, just like, so you wrote the screenplay.
I wrote
so
the screenplay, yeah.
Like, did you set it like back in the mid 2000s? Is it adapted for today?
No, it's adapted for today.
The Steven Seagal joke still in there?
No. There's a lot of things that are changed for the present day. People actually have cell phones now.
Right. So it's today.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of things that, like, there was a scene where the main character really dramatically hangs up the phone.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, press the button. So when this book came out, as soon as it was published, the first thing I did after that was I wrote a screenplay adapting it. So that was
it's been written for a while?
Well, a version of it. So that was in 2007, 8, something like that. And I, at that time, for some reason, I already had agents in Hollywood who were representing me, and they read the script and they're like, well, it's not a studio picture. And
studio picture. I love how they say picture. Right?
And the few people that did read it said it's a good script, but it's not castable. Meaning that I clearly indicate that the main characters are Asian, and so they said, so it was pretty much dead in the water. And it just sat for a long time. And then, I hate to say it, but Crazy Rich Asians came out, and suddenly those same people were like, well, maybe it is castable now, and so I spent a good couple year or two rewriting it and updating it, and it was really fun. It was really fun for me to go back and revisit material from so long ago and feel like I got a second chance at improving things and redoing it and making it better, at least to my sensibility, all within that project of bringing it into the present day.
Right.
So
it's in post-production now. It's all shot?
It's shot. Yeah, it exists. Wow. They're editing it now.
Did you have a hand in that, or were you on set sometimes?
I was on set. Yeah. It was I wrote it just on my own, and then started working with a production company, and then we hired the director, Randall Park, and we kind of worked together to sort of, shape up the script. And then they filmed it this summer we did mostly in New York City and then a little bit in the Bay Area.
So on location?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my stipulations. I said that as much as I am dying for this movie to exist and I really want it to happen, if you tell me that all we can afford is to shoot it in Toronto and have people say like, gosh, I love being here in the Big Apple or something like that. And I was like, then I don't want to do it because I've seen so many of those movies.
Right.
And I just said, so like, just see if you can get enough money. And if you can't, then just forget it. I don't want to do the Vancouver version of whatever. And so amazingly, these guys pulled it together and got just enough for us to do all location, all over New York and all the different boroughs, and then in Berkeley and Oakland.
That's great. Just like when you wrote it, so you reference shots, actually sitting there, that Mexican restaurant. Like actually doing it in the place.
It's unbelievable. I mean, there are things where I would just, in the scene heading, I would say it takes place in Berkeley Marina Park, and no one knows what that is, but the producers went online, they typed it in, like, oh, okay, they found the Google location, and then there they are. They're setting up the cameras at this park in Berkeley overlooking the bay.
Amazing.
And there was just tons of stuff like that. I mean, to me, it was very weird that there were certain things that I was very specific about. I was like, it must be this. And then they weren't able to do it or they chose not to. And then there's other things that I just couldn't believe I was seeing come to life.
Yeah, it must have been so surreal.
Yeah, it was really
That's great. I can't wait for it to
amazing.
come out. What do you think? It's like, do we have time for questions or?
Maybe one or two.
One or two, okay. But by the way, no pretentious questions like this guy, all right?
Thank you. No, it's fine. That's the famous one
V-neck,
one last question. For some reason in my life, we've always had a very harmonious Q&A session until the organizer says, okay, I think we have time for one last one. And then some guy puts his hand up, and it's usually this guy.
Okay, we're going to start with the last question. We're going to start with the last question.
Hi, JC, can you go back to that last page of Amber Sweet for a sec?
Sure. This is Rob Barry, the cartoonist I co-teach
Oh,
with.
hello.
Hey.
This one?
Yeah. So this is kind of a two-part on process, Adrian. First, on the early parts of process, could you talk about thumbnailing and how important that is to you? And then the second part of the question is regarding finishes, because I've always been really impressed with your color palette.
Oh, thanks.
So do you have like a set color palette that you tuck away for things and and it's like, I'm going to use that chestnut brown against this blue, because you work in such great limited flat tones.
Yeah.
And they work so well together. They have their own rhythm. So.
Okay, so the first part of the question was about thumbnails, which, if you don't know, means just like a small rough version of the finished thing. And I have now written comics in every conceivable way. Sometimes with those kinds of things, I wrote some earlier books almost like a script first, and I'd sit there and type it out, and then I would translate that into comic form, which I don't really recommend now with in hindsight. And I think, was it this book? At a certain point, I decided that felt like an unnecessary step of translation, of taking words and then turning it into comics, and that I wanted to try and write in the language of comics, and that meant not using a computer, but using basically graph paper and a pencil, and just doing really kind of quick, almost stick figure versions, and writing the words in the panels and looking at it as a complete page. I'm pretty sure that that's how this story was written. It's been a while, but I'm pretty sure that's how it was done.
And you chose the square format of the word balloons for this one? Because it works for that last panel that you were talking about.
Yeah, that was just, again, every story in the book I was trying to do things a little differently. No great meaning behind it. In terms of color, I think I don't literally have a palette that I set aside that I'm drawing from, but I think in my mind I've memorized a certain number of colors that I just go back to and use instinctively. A lot of times, if I'm making an edit or something like that, or changing something, I'll pick a color and then we'll find that that's the exact pink that I've used in like 20 other things, but I didn't know the numbers of it. Yeah, and this was a lot of experimentation. It was me doing comics in color for the first time, so I was sort of trying to figure things out.
Was that really the only question?
I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, she did
Here
it.
it comes.
She
Here
did
it
it.
comes.
Exactly what I was afraid of.
I'm so sorry, but if you do one more question twice, it negates it.
nullifies the
it's-
curse.
Then it's just questions.
Thank you. I actually had a question about that same
Oh,
slide.
you want me to go back? Yeah.
I was just curious. Those were two, an earlier version and then the published version of the same.
They're both published, but just
Oh.
one is in Killing and Dying, one is in this giant kind of anthology.
Is that woman the same character, or is that one the doppelganger with the brown hair?
What?
That's an interpretation question.
Wait.
So Amber Sweet is the name of a porn star,
Yeah.
right, I think, and
But-
and her name we don't know. That's the thing. We never learn her name,
The narrator.
the
yeah.
narrator's name.
Yeah.
Um,
I can't remember which panels you were talking about, but
this one.
you're saying
Like
is this?
that woman and the woman in the hug, are they the same character?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. This one is supposed to be the porn star.
Yes.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Sorry. I they're both from a long time ago, so it's hard for me to remember actually.
But they have different hairstyles.
Yeah. Okay. Is there one more? I'll tempt fate. We have time for one last question.
Whoa, you did it this time.
I know.
All right, your hand shot up the fastest.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. It's just kind of piggybacking off of what the other gentleman had asked. Was it difficult to make the jump from just working in black and white to doing color, or had you had previous experience painting, or did it just kind of come naturally?
No experience painting. The only color experience I had was in my illustration work. So I'd done a lot of color work in that regard, which is kind of a different thing because like I said, if I'm doing a New Yorker cover, I'll spend like a month on it, and I can really, to the point of absurdity, fiddle around with the colors and everything like that. And in doing comics where you have like multiple images per page, you can't quite be that detailed and that precious. And not only for time reasons, but for aesthetic reasons, I find like comics that are colored in a really detailed, elaborate way, like totally illegible to me. Like when it's like everything is shaded and Photoshop with the fades and highlights and everything like that. It's like I can't even see the line work anymore. Like it's so aggressive. This was, of course, I put up. You showed like the most elaborate, detailed panel that I've ever done. But that was a special panel to wrap up the story. But in general, I was really, and you could even see that I was like in the earlier version compared to the later version, I was trying to simplify and pare it down and find ways to make characters come forward and backgrounds recede, things like that. But everything about this book, my hope was that it would be, for me and for the reader, they would see that it was like a learning process, that I was sort of like, I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm going to try this out. And because I think that was like something that was really lacking from my work for a long time, is like, I figured out this very specific thing that I can do pretty well, and I don't dare step out of that boundary. And I think for me as an artist, and I think for the reader, my hope was that it would be interesting to see some mistakes and some failures and some, stay in your lane kind of moments. Because that's I look for that in artists in general, like not just cartoonists, but like authors and filmmakers too. Like I'm really excited when I see someone like, okay, like we know what a Noah Baumbach movie is, and now he's adapting White Noise. So it's like, let's see what this is. Like that's very exciting to me. And so, it's just a learning process. I know there's a lot of theory about color and everything, but I'm not smart enough to understand it. It's just kind of intuitive, I guess. Sure.
I have one more
Sure.
question.
Yes.
What are you reading? Who are you reading? What cartoonists and what
That's a good question.
other writers?
Boy, you you catch me at a strange time in my life, where I've been so affected by the experience of making this movie that I don't. Well, I can mention, like I thought Kate Beaton's new book Ducks was probably the best graphic novel that I've read recently. I think that just came out this week. I like a guy named Noah Van Sciver who does a lot of different things, but it's I don't want to end on a down note, but I do feel like that the experience of making the film was really significant, and it affected me, and it really made me realize how focused I've been on comics for I'd say 46 years, and how as much as I love comics and have enjoyed everything that it's led to in my life, but I feel like in some ways that it was almost like there was something that as a 2-year-old I was kind of good at, and someone said like, hey, you're good at that, and then I said like, okay, well, I'm going to devote the rest of my life to that one thing that someone said I was kind of good at, and then I'm 48 years old and I'm still doing the same thing. So I am definitely at a point where I'm focused on writing more than comics right now, and will inevitably return to that phase of feeling like I'm a full-time cartoonist, and that's something that I love. But it has been a really strange experience to, like, for the first time have this feeling of like, I kind of like working with other people, and I kind of like collaborating, and I can trust other people, other artists, and they'll do great work, and I can be a part of a team, which is something that I never experienced before. And I know there's ways you can have that experience making comics, but not the way I did. Like, so for my whole life, I've sat in a room by myself and done everything from start to finish. And my publisher always says, I look forward to reading it when it comes back from the printer. So that was the extent of the editing and collaboration, which was great. I'm very grateful for. But right now, I'm definitely in a different phase creatively and as a person, I think.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for this amazing conversation. Adrian has said that he has some time to sign. We also have a reception, classic cheese, fruit, all that stuff that we love to have here. So get your fill. There are books for sale. And also, please pick up one of the broadsides. They're really lovely. And thank you all for coming.